Welcome back to Scaling Up Not Giving Up, the podcast for founders and leaders who want to grow their business without losing themselves in the process. Today's guest is Rachael Edmondson-Clarke, a coach and leadership psychologist with a seriously powerful story. She was thriving in a high-level corporate role until one afternoon she collapsed on the floor of her glass-fronted office. That moment changed everything. In this episode, we talk about how to scale your success without scaling your stress. Rachael shares the science behind burnout, the emotional and biological cost of pushing through, and how we can lead with more energy, clarity and confidence without sacrificing our health, our relationships or our teams. Whether you're a founder riding the hypergrowth roller coaster or a leader navigating pressure from every angle, this one's for you. So today I'm so pleased to be joined by Rachael Edmondson-Clarke. Rachael, for the listeners, can you give us a little potted history of your background and what's led you to being on the podcast today?
Oh, well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. We have had this in the diary for quite some time, and I've got to say, I'm super excited for our conversation today.
Me too.
Podcast, and I love everything that you stand for, so I'm really excited to be here. So a little bit of potted history. I come from a corporate background. I've got senior leadership experience. I left that just over 10 years ago now to set up my own business. And what I do now is I help leaders to lead better, live better, and love what they do. So I'm a coach, a speaker, and a trainer.
Amazing. So I guess the main part of our conversation today is going to be around how do we scale our success, but without scaling our stress levels at the same time. And I think, this is something that both of us have got some experience in. Hopefully you're better at than me because my stress levels do spike quite easily. But anyway, we'll go straight into it. I guess the first bit of this is you really suffered from burnout when you were in the corporate world. Just explain to us what happened and what led you to that kind of realization and that crash.
And I think one thing I just want to acknowledge as well is none of us are perfect. And as human beings, we're
100% always learning.
And always learning and always dealing with different levels of uncertainty and stress and things that are going off. So, whilst there's certainly some things that I have learnt along the way, I'm also still always learning as well and always on that journey. But I can remember vividly the afternoon that it happened. So I was in my glass fronted office. I was preparing to go into the boardroom. And instead of walking out the door, I found myself lying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling tiles. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe was the scariest thing. I'd collapsed and I didn't know what was happening to me at the time. I mean, I later realized that what I was experiencing was a form of a panic attack.
But if you've never experienced one before, you feel like you're dying, don't you? You would, if someone had asked you, you'd think you were having a heart attack.
Yeah, absolutely that. And you're kind of like, oh my God, you're like, what is happening to me? And, that it was from that moment on that everything for me, everything changed really. That was the pivotal point.
What happened after that then? I'm assuming you didn't make it into the board meeting.
Way to get out of the exec meeting that day. I definitely wouldn't recommend going that far. No, I mean, so I guess what happened after that was that was my wake up point. I remember feeling like, this is perhaps a bit of an odd analogy, but I remember feeling like I was being slapped around the face with a bit of a wet fish to kind of go, you can't keep doing this to yourself, because the truth was that I'd been, doing well, achieving, and I'd been on what I thought was the path to, what I wanted, from university to entering corporate life to climbing that corporate ladder. And my answer to it all was to continue to want to strive for more and to work harder and longer hours and to do more. And I did that all, and over years, really, it was. Picked up bad habits that just meant I was disrespecting my body. I wasn't connected or listening to myself and what I needed. I was neglecting the most important relationship in my life. It left me enormously kind of disappointed with myself in terms of how I was showing up and how I was performing, if I'm honest with you. But it kept on pushing, kept on going, just push through, just get through this next bit, just get through this next bit. So that was the point that it was all like, right, okay, that strategy is not working. And ultimately what I did was I realized I had to ask for help. And what that meant practically was that I helped restructure the team that I was looking after. And I effectively took a demotion. I went from having that glass fronted office, which was just for senior managers in the organization that I was working with, and the rest of the office was all open plan. You can imagine this, I went from being in that glass fronted office to being outside and kind of back into the open plan world. And so I had to swallow a lot of pride. I certainly felt shame and I felt guilt at that time. I can remember apologizing to the CEO, and he treated me with such kindness and sort of even himself took personal responsibility for kind of what had happened and the environment that had led me to get to that point. And physically, emotionally and mentally, I recovered. And ultimately, it led me on that journey to find my ikigai, my purpose in life and what I do now. And I'm super grateful for that. And I think, those experiences, they can make us stronger and nudge us or lead us to different paths and opportunities. And when you're in the thick of it, almost you can't conceive that could be the positive outcome when you're in the storm. But, I certainly experienced that anti-fragility. That whole, actually through the stresses and the strains and the challenges, we grow, we become more and are able, to evolve into and grow into better human beings.
Yeah, I mean, such an interesting story. So many questions for me. First up, I guess, one, did the culture in the organization change? Because obviously it sounds like you made quite a lot of changes personally and from the way you operate professionally. But when you mentioned the CEO almost took personal responsibility about what led to this, did the whole pressure and culture change at the top of that organization that meant that it's less likely for this to happen again to someone else?
Yeah. So there was a really big macro thing going on in the organization, which was always going to be enormously challenging, sort of really up against some very difficult circumstances. So that was one thing. I think the other thing to put into context is that at the point that I was appointed into that role, my experience could meet those demands, but the demands of the role grew quicker than my skill set and experience. And at the same time, my boss was actually new into the function of marketing and it was her first marketing role. So all of those dynamics at play were, kind of that was the context within what I was up against. Yeah. And so it wasn't perhaps that the culture needed to change, but what we certainly did do was we recruited, sort of a far more senior experienced consultant that could support that role and just where the expectations of that role had moved and evolved to since the time that I had been appointed in.
I think this is a really important bit, and I've spoke to people about this before, which is it's about making sure that the right person's in the right seat. And it sounds like you were the right person in the right seat, but quickly maybe the seat was wrong for you or you were wrong for the seat. And I think sometimes as leaders, when we make a hire, we go, this is the right person for the right job. But then we forget that the person changes sometimes, but the job changes too. And therefore we sometimes get a bit stuck and go, well, they were fantastic 6 months ago. This is the right job for them. But we forget that actually people need developing. We need to have tough conversations around what the role is and whether some of that role could be maybe split into, and people play into their strengths rather than feeling like they're drowning. And I think it's super important, isn't it? And it sounds like, you've been through that process and it's tough, isn't it? What would you recommend to someone in that position, or that they could see that they're putting someone in that position in their team?
So I suppose that's two different things, isn't it? So if it was somebody in that position, I think if I think back to how I was then, and I'm going back, 13, 14 years now, that's how long ago this was for me. But if I go back to that then, there would have been a huge part of me that would have had to almost feel like I was accepting failure, like I wasn't good enough somehow. And that would have been enormously challenging for me to have done. And that's what was driving that, the boss has had this faith in me. They put me into this role. Like, I want to do this role. I want to serve the company. I want to serve my team. I want to do well. And so my advice to somebody who might be in that kind of a situation would be, actually, if you think you are heading for that burnout and you don't have the capacity or the support to be able to really flourish in what you're doing, speak up so that there can be at least some adjustments made, or at least that would be the objective. So, what support can you get? Because the other context that I missed out of this was that I didn't have a full complement in terms of my team, so I was under resourced in the team, and within that team there were some performance challenges. So I had one or two really good high performers and some that were not coping as well with that as well. So it's kind of like, what are the adjustments? Where can you get that additional resource and support in? Is that possible to do that to enable you to succeed in that role and that position, and kind of getting in that helicopter and taking that view and looking out? So that would be what I'd say if you're experiencing this personally. I don't know what you might add to that with your experience.
Well, I think what I'm just instantly thinking is, what happens if you are the person at the top of that organization? You founded a business and you feel like your skills are not up to the job, and have a bit of that imposter syndrome yourself. Or it may be that it's not just imposter syndrome, it's real. You are out of your depth. What can you do then? Because I think, it's easier when you're maybe employed, you can say, well, you can speak to your manager, etc. But actually, when you are the one that all of this is channeling to, it can be quite a lonely place at the top.
And like you, I work with, a number of C-suite CEOs, and that feeling is real and that is prevalent. And very much an experience that I have from the clients that I now work with. And I think there's a number of things that can help. And there's some things that we can absolutely talk about today, that people can do for themselves. But equally, I think having that support network is absolutely critical. And whether that's in the form of a coach, or whether that's in the form of mentorship, whether that's in the form of a community, where you can get some of that support and you can speak openly and share these things. I know some of my clients are connected with organizations like Vistage, for example, and they find that community really supportive. But if nothing else, that you can speak to other people in similar roles and go, oh, hang on, I'm not the only one, So again, I'm coming back to, aren't I? I'm coming back to that. Actually, where can you get that help and resource? Don't keep battling on and pushing through.
Yeah, and it is tricky. And I think it's really important to say the first place you reach out to might not be the right place. I certainly did that. I took on a business coach when I was struggling in the business because we'd had hyper growth. And I think I reached out to someone I had met at an event several years ago. And I think they were great in some aspects, but I think they didn't really have enough tech experience. So some of the issues I was going through were quite different to the type of experience. They were pretty much like a car retailer, essentially. A car retailer is one type of business, but it's very different to a software as a service business. And so, my main weakness was sales and how to lead a sales team. And I think the way you lead a car sales team and the way you lead a tech sales team are quite different. So I think, maybe also identifying if it's not the right fit for you, moving on and finding the right fit for you as a leader in that coach or mentor relationship or community. It's not always the first place you get to.
Absolutely, 100%. And I would always recommend, if anyone approaches me from a coaching perspective, I'll always ask the question, like, what other coaches have you spoken to? Because actually the way that I coach and that that I work will be very different to the way that you work, and that chemistry and that dynamic is going to be really important. So before working with a client one-on-one, I would always encourage them, right, at least go and meet 2 or 3 coaches. So you just get a feeling and an experience for how different people work differently. I couldn't agree with you more on that. And if it's not working, to not be afraid to, pull the plug on that or press pause and go and explore other options.
And I think there was something else that you said earlier, which it would be interesting to return to, which is you felt you were achieving, you were doing the stuff you set out at university to do, you were climbing the corporate ladder, you were, in a business that was growing, etc. How do you think founders can identify if they're doing something that they want or they're being carried along by their business? Because I think sometimes businesses grow arms and legs and it's not always what the founder set out to do, by which time they're a bit stuck. It's hard to make change when the company gets larger. So what's your advice there?
So my advice there would be every 3 months, check in terms of your values. What are those experiences that are most important to you? Have they changed? Has life circumstances changed? Really making sure. So it's that whole, let's just stick our head up for a minute and let's just, check. Are we heading in the right direction? When I say are we heading in the right direction, in the direction that you want to take things? And is this, is this still what you want? Yeah, because we can get so carried away. Yeah, absolutely. So a 3-month check-in.
Yeah. Awesome. And I guess if you obviously kind of reached a massive cliff edge with your burnout, what advice and tips would you give someone on spotting it before it gets to that stage?
There were so many signs that I was ignoring. I mean, if I go back, I can remember I used to go and turn the office lights on in the morning and I'd be the person switching them off at night. Like, that's not a warning sign. And we used to swipe in and out with timing cards. And, those hours told me that I was doing way too much. And then I was doing more at home on top of those hours. I delayed our wedding twice. People at work started calling me the runaway bride. So all of those things, I was just, and I was struggling cognitively because I was not restoring myself biologically. I was just under permanent biological stress. So I wasn't thinking straight or clearly.
And I guess moving on then to that kind of like neuro and scientific understanding and the link between how our brains work and how our energy is affected when we're leaders. What's your thought on that? Because I think there's maybe something that we can draw here between those 2 elements, isn't there? It's not just the physical act of doing something, is it? Because you may be able to continue doing that for quite a long time. It's the mental capacity that brings you down and that mental strain that's going to cause a panic attack.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a huge part of the work that I do now with senior leadership teams that want to, teams in general, in fact, that are perhaps in demanding circumstances, whether that's change, growth, or struggling with that as well. So, kind of all those different spectrums. And it's like, actually, how do we equip ourselves to have the capacity? So much of leadership training is around capability and skill set, but actually, how do we make sure that we've got the capacity to be able to show up and behave in a way that means that we can lead our people and lead them well? Because, when we lead with how we make people feel, that is when we get the engagement. If we think about what are the inputs to our mood, our energy and our ability to deal with stress, well, from a biological perspective, it's all the stuff that your grandma told you. Am I sleeping well? Am I eating well? Have I had daylight? Am I moving my body? Have I spent time with people that I love and care about and who care about me? All of these things are things that restore us. And, throwing my phone at the screen here at you. We spend so much time, or we pay a lot of focus and attention on making sure that this thing's always got charge in the battery. But are we paying as much attention to our own, restoration of our own batteries?
I'm instantly thinking there is, sometimes I need a midday charge in my phone. Does that mean midday naps are acceptable?
God, yes. Absolutely. I'm all for that. Yeah. And this is the thing. It's like so many leaders that I work with, they'll be like, well, if I can just get over this hump of work, if I can just get to the weekend, or if I can just get to the end of this day, or if I can just get to the next holiday, that's not how our body works. And that's not going to be optimal for your cognitive, emotional,
Do you think there's ever a point where you should be saying to yourself, do you know what, I'm doing like crazy hours at the moment, but it's okay because it's just for this month because we've got this really important deadline? Do you think that's ever acceptable, or do you think we should never be saying that to ourselves?
It's such a good question. So there are days that I would call those paying the price days. There are days when we have to pay the price, and there are times when we have to pay this. So it's not even a day. It might be several days. You can think about if you're traveling with business and it's impacting things because you're not seeing your family, you're not sleeping as well, you're not eating as well, all of those things. So there are going to be paying the price days. And, the point is recognizing that I've got to pay the price to do this deadline, to get this thing over the line, to see this project through, whatever it is, to get this thing launched. Then it's about, okay, so how do I build in, sometimes it might be micro restoration within your day, within that. And how do you get back to that restoration as soon as that period is up? One thing that I found enormously helpful is thinking about what would be some of like the absolute base level habits that even if I'm paying the price, I can still do around restoration. For example, I may not be able to get 7+ hours in bed of sleep, but I can look at my sleep efficiency and, seek to make that as good as possible. I might not be able to
An example of sleep efficiency?
Well, so on your sleep apps where it just tells you how efficient you've been in terms of your sleep efficiency. So that it's mixed up of a whole number of things, like I think your sleep regularity and how quickly you've gone to sleep, what that sleep's been like. That's through a sleep app. Admittedly, not everybody will have one of those, but those that have got Fitbits, Garmin, rings and so on, then I'm sure that we're all over that. So if it can't be 7+ hours in bed, then, actually what can that be? Another example, perhaps a better example, might be things like nutritional protocol. Now, we'll all have our own nutritional protocol. We'll all know what serves us well and what doesn't. But, my base level is that one meal a day, at least one meal a day, I can follow my nutritional protocol. No matter what. If I'm paying the price, I can at least get my breakfast that I know will be following my nutritional protocol.
Just on the paying the price days then, I love the fact it's days. How long could these days be going on for? A month? A week? 2 weeks? 6 months?
Well, and so this is what I mean about the micro, like kind of having these basics, so that even throughout these days, you're still headed in the right direction. It's almost like when you're paying the price, you have to double down on that protocol as much as as much as you can to enable you to have the reserves and the capacity to continue. And to answer your question directly, which I was kind of avoiding there for a minute.
Politician's answer.
The answer to that question is we're all different. And actually, I can't tell you, but what this is about you being connected to yourself and in such a way that you are recognizing your own signs. And it's like restoration isn't about reward. Restoration is about your performance, and it's about how you show up and show up well. Neglect it at your, neglect it at your peril, really, would be my warning sign on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I would say is it's really important to understand. So, if it is that you've just had paying the price days for the last 2 weeks, it's about knowing you've done that for the last 2 weeks, and you may choose to do it for the next 2 weeks as well, because, we can sometimes go from crisis to crisis or deadline to deadline or, big project to big projects. We're pushing our businesses forward, and that's absolutely fine. But I think sometimes you do just need to even understand that you're paying the price every day, and this has gone on for a significant period, because it's really easy to go, okay, well, it's just this project, like you said earlier, but you forget that you just did this for the last 20 projects. So we're now 2 years into that, it's just this project. So I think we sometimes get stuck in that, but it's just this project. And that's okay if A, you can manage that, or B, it is maybe just this project and not every project for the past however long, which I think is what leads us. And sometimes we kid ourselves and we forget that because we just get so stuck in there. Well, just this project, just this project, just this quarter, just this month. Got a really tough month for sale, just this month, and then next month to see.
I don't know about you, but I think one of the traits of high achievers and high performers is that we're driven by this dopamine system. That, when we hit the target, we get the deadline, we get the thing, that gives us that dopamine kick, and it pushes us towards that success, but it also creates some obsessive and compulsive behaviors that can lead to burnout. So again, I come back to the self-awareness and that connection with yourself, and that properly and honestly checking in. And maybe you've got some good people around you. Maybe you've got some, a wife, a husband, a spouse, some, children that can kind of go, oh, hang on a minute, right? You need to take a day off, or you need to, that can kind of keep you in check with some of that stuff. Because, and this is where, kind of coaches and things are also really good in terms of helping support us with that self-awareness, and really where we're at. And what we're talking about here is giving you the capacity to be able to do more with less. Like, what if the 30-hour work week version of you was more valuable to your organization than the 70 or 80-hour work week version of you? That's what I'm talking about. If you think about a high performance athlete, their recovery and their restoration is a critically important part of their high performance.
But their race may be 10 seconds.
Absolutely.
If you think of a 100-meter final.
You're not running the marathon every single day. Or some endurance athletes might be doing that, but still only for a short period of time. And I think we need to think in those terms as well. So it's how do we keep that top, how do we keep in competition standard, recognizing that there's going to be points where we're dipping into that, like we're doing the competition, we're doing the thing, we're needing to show up at that, but then coming back to, right, keeping in competition standard, topping, restoring, and, supporting that restoration.
As the leader of an organization, how do you get over the internal conflict between feeling guilty for taking time off, keeping yourself in top shape? Like, I certainly know I was starting to get to a period of burnout in my business. I saw it, I felt exhausted, my sleep was terrible, etc. Actually, business was kind of fine at the time. We were growing. I didn't need to be there. And I said, you know what, I'm going to take like a few days off this week. So it was like Tuesday, and I said, I'm just going to take the rest of the week off. Didn't really have anything in. It was fine for me to do that. By the Thursday, I had someone ringing me, and I said, I'll take the odd call, if there's something really urgent, etc. And the person ringing me spoke to me about this, and they're like, okay, so you're going to be back tomorrow? And I was like, and I did go back the next day because I felt like I was shamed into going back to work. They weren't doing it maliciously. I think it was just this view of, well, you've had a couple of days off now, you must be feeling better. Do you know what I mean? But actually, we need to remember sometimes that depending on where we're at in that burnout cycle, 1 or 2 days might not be enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is really important because, you just said before, your kids might be saying, okay, look, you're knackered, etc. And you're like, do you know what? I need a day. Actually, it might be more than a day.
Might well be. And a lot of people talk about work-life balance, don't they? And I prefer the language work-life integration because I think that's much more realistic to have our lives today, and particularly as business owners, and it's always going on. So I'm always looking for, how do I integrate my own time, family time, business time, and how can we integrate those things rather than it being this or that, and integrating them in a really healthy way whilst you protect those boundaries as well. Your first question was around, how do you manage that guilt with wanting to, kind of keep things in
look after yourself while being, I guess, a bit of presenteeism as well there.
Yes. So what I would say is a reframe of the thinking of this and the perspective on this. Your cognitive and emotional capacity are business critical. I was working with a senior leader who loves going out on his bike. When I suggested to him, actually to go back to your like can I have an afternoon nap thing. When I suggested to him, look, I want you to go out on your bike in the middle of the day. He's like, what? I'm like, I want you to go out on a bike ride in the middle of the day. And then I want you to come back to your desk and I want you to monitor and see about your performance after you've gone and done that bike ride. And it was just like the light bulb went on for him. And he was like, oh my gosh, my bike ride and prioritizing that hour is business critical because of the difference that it makes to how I show up after I've done that. And if I don't do that kind of what I mean, it's not something he does every day. Let's be about this, but that whole reframe that actually this is the input that allows me to have the output the output that I want for myself and for the business. And I think the other thing that I would say is that you then role model that as a leader for others around you. And it can be as simple as, it doesn't have to be the hour-long bike ride. It can be as simple as, I see you. Well, actually, I'm having lunch at the moment. So either, come and join, either come and join me and let's eat together, or actually, let's not do Zoom or Teams. Let's have an old fashioned phone call. And you know what? Let's go and it's a gorgeous day outside. Let's go and get some sunshine and a walk around the block while we catch up. You can build, this is what I mean about the integration. You can build the restoration into your working day and role model those really good practices.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the best meetings I ever had with my team was outside. We had a picnic bench out the back and it was really sunny. And the ideas, it was like a product idea session. The ideas we got that day were fantastic and everyone was absolutely buzzing afterwards. And I was like, you know what, makes such a difference just sitting outside. And we had that picnic table there for lunch largely, for if it got sunny. But one day I was just like, do you know what, it's really sunny. Why don't we just sit outside and do this? Bring a cup of your water. We can do it outside. Don't need to sit in the office, do we?
We are so going back to the biology, we are designed to have daylight and to be moving and to be out in that fresh air. And so much of our lifestyles today is keeping us indoors, is keeping us sedentary. And it's not, and it's not conducive of that creativity as you've just, and that higher performance as you've just beautifully illustrated with your story.
You said it before about, well, I guess energy enablers, which was the bike ride. Should we talk a little bit about energy drainers and things that sap our energy and what we should do with those as leaders?
Yeah, of course. So I suppose we talked about the inputs into energies. Kind of whether it's biological, whether it's physical, or whether it's that social, the people who make us feel good and charge us up from an energy perspective in a really positive way. I guess things that can really drain us and that can be very challenging. I think from a social perspective as human beings, any time that we get triggered where perhaps we feel that things are uncertain or we're not being fairly treated, or perhaps we feel like we don't have the autonomy or we're not valued in some way, shape or form, I think that can trigger emotional dysregulation in us. And when we are emotionally dysregulated, what we will often do as leaders is regulate that in some way, whether we suppress it down, whether we try and use positive mindset things to reframe that, whether we use breathing techniques or we go out for a walk or run. There's all sorts of things that we can do. I think what my point is here is that if you're going to fully get back to being in a restored energetic state, looking at how you can resolve those things that are triggering you emotionally. So if it's someone, how can you talk to them to resolve it? And if it's something, how can you fix it? And recognition fully here that you can't always resolve these things and you can't always resolve them quickly. But at least if we can feel like we're making progress to resolve those things, which might mean leaning into difficult and honest conversations with members of staff and things like that. But, actually facing into some of those things so you can get that emotional resolution, that too will also help in terms of, kind of ensuring your energy is restored again.
I also think there's a bit around making sure that your view of the organisation is a realistic one. I think sometimes shit can rise to the top. So your view as the founder or leader of the organisation is that everything's crap because you spend most of your day dealing with crap. And I think you sometimes fail to realise the good stuff that's happening because you just don't hear about good stuff as easily. Like, problems rise, don't they? Whereas solutions don't. They're just solutions and they're dealt with. So I think sometimes you can end up with a very skewed view of your organisation that isn't the real view of your organisation, but that can be a real energy drainer because you just feel like everything's going wrong. And that's not the case. It's just everything you're seeing is going wrong, and it's about changing what you're looking at.
100%. I think, focus is such an important thing for us to be mindful of. We can choose to focus on what's wrong, like you were saying there, on what's wrong or what's right. We can choose to focus on what we're concerned about or where we want to go. Even focusing, a choice in focus in terms of, are we focused on, the past, the present, or the future? That can all impact how we're feeling in any given moment. And so you are spot on. And interestingly, I was having a conversation earlier today with a senior leader, an HR senior leader, and their CEO's view of the organization is absolutely not a realistic one. Absolutely not. And, just talking about how do we help that individual to get a better handle on the reality of what's going on.
And is it a negative realistic view, or are they too positive?
They're actually too positive.
Interesting. Yeah. And I was thinking, like, I'm a bit more of a pessimistic person, so I think my view would always be negative. But I have also seen that with others that I've worked with in business, where their view is that everything is fantastic and you're looking in thinking, this is, let's get down to reality a little bit. But, I do agree that a lead does need to be positive, but it's, how can I put it? Realistic positivity, maybe, rather than unrealistic positivity.
Things as they are, not really worse than they are, or through the rose-tinted glasses. I think that seeing things as they are is critical. And we're in a particularly unique point, I think, or moment in time in terms of our human story and evolution. When we look at, kind of how we've shot up in terms of human population on the planet in recent terms, when we look at, the energy that we've got from fossil fuels, and recognizing that we've had this real surplus in energy actually for a very long time. And when we look at the geopolitical climate and everything that's going on, we are in uncertain times. And it's not about losing our heads around that. I don't know that any of us can fully predict at the moment what could happen next, or, the kinds of environments or things that we're going to be dealing with. So it comes back to everything that we've been talking about, because the thing that we can control is our capacity to be able to lead well no matter what the circumstances are and no matter what is going on. And that goes right back to, that personal ecosystem. Are we looking after ourselves? Like everything your grandma said, are you looking after yourself? And are you resolving those things that are challenging you emotionally as well, so that we can lead our people, our teams, our companies, and do that from that place of capacity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we touched on a little bit earlier, but company culture, I think, makes a massive difference here. What do you think are the common mistakes in trying to fix or implement a company culture that you see?
Well, I suppose, I'm going to come back to it because I think this is relevant, is that I think often culture and personal performance of individuals and or leaders can sort of be seen as two different things, but actually they work simultaneously. So, when you've got people that are operating well, when they are respecting, when they are, they're recognizing that their feelings are out of whack, when they are focusing, on that restoration, when they are resolving emotions and, if necessary, regulating and reframing those well and in a healthy, constructive, conscious way, that actually leads to better cultural environments. So then you do have the environment where, well, hang on a minute, I see that leader is a human being and that I can trust them because I see through their body language and their actions and everything that they're doing that this is authentic and they've got logic, and because they've got the capacity, they've got empathy. So that's going to build trust. And that's going to build engagement and that psychological safety. And all of those things that, from a cultural perspective, we want in our organizations. So I think whether it's on an individual level or at an organizational level, that's why this work is so important. And it starts with you.
I also think the thing with culture is you set that culture when you're at the top, but you also need to live and breathe it. It's not just posters on a wall, etc. You need to embody it. You need to challenge when people are not living up to that culture or the business's values. And you need other people to challenge you when you're not, because, none of us are perfect. We all have our moments, do you know what I mean, where a client's really annoyed us or whatever and we're not treating them right because we're really frustrated. We need a culture where everyone can call everybody else out on those things, including the leader.
I've been working with a senior leadership team, and the guy who heads it up, he's going through divorce, and he's spoken to the team about how, he recognized that he started to get into some regulation habits around drink as well. And, since working together, his focus on things like his diet, his sleep, the movement, the stuff that the team have done. And, they've walked around the world and back as a team. They've set themselves that challenge to get outdoors, to get in the daylight, to get that movement. And, like you say, he is absolutely living and breathing and embodying all of this. And he's doing it from a place of vulnerability and honesty as well with some of the challenges that he's had. And then that senior team and high potential group, are there to support him, and they can see that, okay, like, we know none of us are perfect, and we know that we're all figuring this out as we go along. And actually it's so much better when we can support one another in how we do that. So, I just think he's really role models beautifully how, as a leader, you can really impact the culture with the team, because they are now having exceptionally brave conversations with one another around the things that are, peeing them off, the stuff that's causing like disruption, but they're doing it in a really constructive, positive way.
And how do you think culture can drive energy in an organization?
I think, well, the culture is, I suppose, in many senses, it's the behaviours people adopt within the organisation, and those behaviours will drive that, will drive that energy, and whether that feels positive, neutral, or negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that piece around trust is really important for leaders. But equally, it's quite hard to build in organisations, because I think people are inherently wired when they go into workplaces not to be trusting of their managers and of their leaders. And so actually, if you are a leader that is quite open with their teams and quite empowering of their teams, sometimes people don't know what to do with that, because they've been in organisations for 20 years that are not like that. So suddenly they just don't know what to do with it. So I think you have to persist with it, don't you?
You do, and you just keep being human.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose maybe that's not helpful. As I guess, in a sense, what do I mean by being human? I think is being curious. I think asking. I think great leaders ask a lot, and they can sometimes, and it doesn't hurt to be the last person to speak, whilst you really kind of understand what's going on. Questions like, what might one person be thinking but not saying? Encouraging that kind of open dialogue within a team, like bringing out the what should we call it? The stinky fish. I don't know, just bringing up all of that stuff. But you've got to ask those questions with rapport and framing them well. And people will, we are creatures that read one another exceptionally well through our body language and everything else. So if you are genuinely curious, and if you are, in that place of alignment with then when you ask those questions, and you are curious and you maybe show some vulnerability as well, appropriate to the situation, etc. I think that, people will read that and they'll know, and they'll know whether, you're being real with them or not. And even if they don't speak in that moment, at least they've experienced you as real, not masked in any way. And it may be that they find the courage to speak with you at another date or later on. So keep that door open.
Absolutely. Just as we're moving to the end of our time together, I can't believe how quickly it's gone. What's a quick win someone can do that's a leader that's listening to this that thinks, do you know what, wow, there's some stuff I should do that's different. What's a quick win?
So for me, I would encourage people, very quick, very simple, just look at your own daily rituals. So, for example, I wake up in the morning with, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, big bottle of water like that by my bed. And the first thing I do in the morning is I drink that. And while I'm drinking it, I do a couple of seconds of gratitude, think about what would make today great, because that's focusing me on the positive outcomes for the conversations, meetings and things that I've got going on. Yeah, I make sure I leave my phone in the office when I'm with my family, and remembering that my day starts the night before. So before I finish, I prep for the next day, I have a shutdown routine, and I get to bed on time, mostly. Not always, not perfect, but get to bed on time. So I would encourage people, do that sort of assessment of your own daily rituals. People, I think, intuitively know the things that they, could maybe be a little better at, and just take one small step. Just take one small step and implement that going forwards.
I guess encourage your teams to implement too.
Gosh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess that'll be a nice shared experience to embed in your company culture, because you can all talk about your collective learnings. What works for you might work for someone else, might not work for someone else, but actually there's something in that shared experience, isn't there, that's useful for everyone.
I would really love to leave listeners with, and that is this idea that you can be a scientist of yourself. So, your friends are saying to you, well, it's because you don't drink enough. Well, you could be that scientist and do an experiment and see, okay, so what is it like if I do drink more water for a period of time? What happens? And so with all of this, whether it's sleep, whether it's diet, whether it's movement, whether it's daylight, whether it's getting out in nature, all of these things, I encourage people, don't do what you think you should do. Experiment with yourself and practice it. Just go give something a try. Does it work? Does it improve your performance, your energy, your mood, your capacity to deal with stress? If it does, keep doing it. And if it doesn't, okay, ditch it. There'll be something else that will work for you.
And how do you work that out though? Because there's so much happening every day, right? So I could start drinking more water tomorrow, but gosh, anything could hit me tomorrow. So how would I know if the drinking water was what had made the difference, or if I was just going to have a good day anyway? Does that make sense? Or a bad day anyway? I could start drinking water tomorrow and go, that was the worst thing ever. I've had the worst day. But it could be nothing to do with the water. So do you know what I mean? Like, how do you do that? Because our lives and our work and our businesses are so chaotic.
So I would encourage you to do something for more than just a day.
But yes, obviously more than a day, but yeah.
You could just keep a really very, very simple note somewhere. Well, so how did I feel today? I mean, I know if I don't have my water because perhaps something's happened with the kids and I find myself coming back from the school run without having drunk all of that, it does not feel good for me. I can really recognize if I haven't had it, but I think it is, yeah. So it's back to that connection and self-awareness, isn't it? It all comes back to that. How And it is a skill to better tune in and listen to how your body is coping and responding and reacting to things.
Yeah.
It is a skill. And, through my work, I do a lot of work, and I'm an accredited coach with an organization called CHX Performance. And we have things like a mood monitoring app, which allows clients to, in 60 seconds, get a mood profile and a read on what their mood is. And that is clinically predictive of their health and their performance. So there are tools and there are things that are out there that would help you with that, but you don't need that. You can tune in, keep a bit of a diary and support that way.
I really like your point. This is a new skill that you need to develop, much like you were developing a business skill or a workplace skill. You're not going to know what feels right and have that mind-body connection tomorrow, next week. It's something that's going to gradually build in you, isn't it? You're going to get better and better and better. And I don't want to say master it, but, get better and better and better at it and more in tune between the two.
Absolutely. And I think the thing here as well is that there's not a perfection with this. There was a sort of little anecdote that I heard a few weeks ago, and it was about a martial arts master and their student. And the student said to the martial arts master, you are always in alignment. You always are so centered and, kind of got it together, still connected, grounded, however you want to. And he said, oh, but I'm not. I'm making micro corrections all the time. And I think that's what we want to aspire to, that we're so tuned in that we can make these little nudges, these little, it's like this little tiny corrections opposed to, oh God, I'm paying the price, I'm over here. Right. Okay. Now I've got to have a week's long holiday or all of this. And instead of these like big swings, we're actually keeping ourselves much more kind of in that centered place with micro corrections, micro restoration.
Yeah, it's a really good way of putting it. I did a flight simulator at the weekend, and unlike driving, it is very tiny movements, and the tiniest of movement has a massive effect, but in about 30 seconds time. So you don't feel the change immediately, which leads you to then turn more because you're not feeling anything, at which point the outcome is really extreme. I think that's probably a really good analogy for exactly what you just said, which is, you might make a small change, but sometimes you have to wait for the effect of that change to come out before you then swing the other way and make a really drastic other change. Because what we're talking about here are small changes that could have large outcomes, but not necessarily immediately. So yeah, I think that's probably a really good place for us to end. Rachel, where can people go if they want to connect with you or reach out to you or work with you?
LinkedIn is the best place to connect with me, and I'm Rachael, spelled A-E-L, Edmondson, and it's Clarke with an E. Basically, if there was an extra letter you could put in my name, just add it and you'll find me.
That's yeah, 2 extra letters. Yeah, what a brilliant way of putting it. Cool. Well, I absolutely loved this conversation. Learned a lot myself. Some of this stuff I had heard before, but I think it's really good to rehear it because, like you said, we're all on that journey. It's sometimes really easy to slip back into old habits again, etc. So yeah, been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
I've loved it. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I love that conversation. There's something so powerful about being reminded that energy isn't just a nice to have, it's a business critical asset. Rachael brought so much clarity to something many of us feel but don't often articulate, that high performance doesn't have to mean high sacrifice. If this episode of Scaling Up Not Giving Up hit home, go connect with Rachael on LinkedIn. And if you're not already subscribed, now's a great time to hit follow. There's more where this came from. And hey, if you're listening to this while working 12-hour days and telling yourself it's just this project, maybe this is your nudge to pause. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.